The enemy's biggest mistake was underestimating you. Not once, not twice. Over and over again, every person who counted you out, every door that slammed in your face, every season where you were passed over, overlooked, dismissed, they all made the same catastrophic error. They looked at you and they saw limitation. They looked at your circumstances and they saw a ceiling. They looked at the version of you that was still being formed and they decided, confidently, that you would never make it past that point. And here you are, still here, still breathing, still standing in a story that should have ended several chapters ago. But before you think this is simply about resilience, before you assume this is just another message about staying strong, I need you to understand something that goes far deeper than anything you've heard before. Because what happened to you wasn't just survival. It wasn't just persistence. Something was being crafted inside of your pain that the enemy could not see, that the people around you could not detect, that even you did not fully understand while you were walking through it. Your weakness became your weapon, not metaphorically, not as a nice-sounding idea, literally. The exact thing that made you feel disqualified was the thing that qualified you. The exact wound that made you feel broken was the thing that made you different. And the victory that is coming into your life, the one you've been waiting for, the one that still feels almost too distant to believe, it isn't arriving in spite of what you went through. It is arriving because of it. Stay with me. Because in the next few minutes, something is going to make sense that has never made sense before. You sensed something was different about your life long before you could explain it. There was a feeling, something quiet, something persistent, that told you your story wasn't like everyone else's. Not better, not worse, just different. Like you were living on a frequency that the people around you couldn't quite tune into. Like there was a version of your life that existed somewhere beyond your current circumstances, and no matter how impossible it seemed, you couldn't shake the feeling that it was real. Most people pushed that feeling down. They called it delusion. They called it arrogance. They surrounded themselves with noise and distraction until the feeling became too faint to hear. But you couldn't do that. And now, looking back, you understand why. You were being kept awake to something. Even in the seasons where you doubted everything, even when the feeling became a whisper, barely audible beneath the weight of disappointment and exhaustion, it never went completely silent. That wasn't wishful thinking. That was preparation speaking. Because here is what nobody tells you about the chosen path. It doesn't look chosen while you're walking it. It looks like confusion. It looks like delay. It looks like watching people who seem far less equipped than you moving into the opportunities you were promised, while you sit in what feels like a waiting room with no clock and no explanation. It looks like loss. It looks like failure. It looks from the inside exactly like being forgotten. And the cruelest part is that you couldn't explain to anyone why it still felt like it meant something. Why even in your most broken moments, something in you refused to completely let go. People around you saw that refusal as stubbornness. They called it denial. But you felt it, even if you couldn't put it into words, that the thread you were holding wasn't pride. It was purpose. And purpose, when it is real, does not release its grip even when you try to release yours. This explains something that has never made sense until right now. Let me tell you something about the enemy's strategy, because understanding it changes everything. The enemy is not afraid of your strength. What the enemy is afraid of is the thing hidden inside your weakness. Because strength, the world can imitate. Strength can be faked, performed, manufactured. People do it every day. They project power and confidence and momentum, and the enemy knows exactly how to work around all of it. But what the enemy cannot replicate, cannot predict, and cannot survive is a person who has been broken all the way down and discovered something unbreakable at their center. That is what happened to you. When you went through the season that brought you to your knees, the loss, the betrayal, the collapse of the plan you had built your entire hope around, something happened that you did not notice because you were in too much pain to see it. The breaking exposed what was underneath, and what was underneath was not weakness. It was the raw, unmediated version of who you actually are, stripped of performance, stripped of the approval of others, stripped of every external thing you had been using to prop up your sense of identity. And what was left, when everything else had been removed, was something that could not be taken. Most people never discover this. They never meet their unbreakable center because they never go through anything powerful enough to expose it. They live their entire lives performing a version of themselves that looks confident but is secretly terrified of being truly tested. And when difficulty comes, they break in a way that never heals correctly because they didn't have the preparation that you had. You felt this but could never put it into words, that your suffering was not random, that it had direction, that even the darkest seasons had something in them that felt, strangely, purposeful, like the pain itself was intentional, like you were being processed rather than punished. You were right, and the enemy, who thought your breaking was your ending, did not realize that your breaking was actually your becoming. That is the mistake. That is the fatal miscalculation. Because what looks like defeat on the outside is often the most intense phase of preparation happening on the inside. And you, without knowing it, without being able to articulate it, were being prepared for something that required exactly the kind of person your suffering was making you into. Now let's talk about the people. Because for most chosen ones, the wound that runs deepest is not the circumstance, it's the people. The ones who left. The ones who stayed but slowly changed. The ones who smiled to your face and quietly hoped you would fail. The ones who saw your potential and felt threatened by it instead of inspired by it. The ones you would have done anything for, who walked away the moment your season changed and things stopped being comfortable. You still carry that, and I need you to hear what I'm about to say next very carefully. Every person who left you when you needed them most was being moved out of a story they were never meant to permanently occupy. Not because they were entirely bad, not because there was no genuine connection, but because your trajectory required a level of faith and resilience and divine alignment that they were not built to sustain. You cannot carry a chosen one's calling with casual commitment. You cannot walk alongside someone being prepared for the extraordinary and remain unchanged by the journey. And the people who left, they were not rejecting you. They were revealing themselves, showing you, at the exact moment you needed to know, who was truly with you and who was only comfortable while the conditions were comfortable. The betrayals were brutal. Sit in that for a moment. Don't rush past it. The ones who turned their back on you, who undermined you, who whispered to others that you were not what you claimed to be, that was one of the most destabilizing things a human being can experience. To be misunderstood by strangers is painful. To be misrepresented by people you trusted is something entirely different. Something that makes you question not just them, but yourself. Not just what they saw in you, but what is actually true about you. But here is what only a chosen one can understand. The rejection wasn't the end. It was a redirection. Every closed door was a blocked path that would have led you somewhere less than what heaven had designed for you. Every person who wrote you off was clearing space, physical, emotional, spiritual space, for what was being assembled in the unseen. Most people will never experience this. They will spend their lives mourning the rooms they were removed from without ever realizing that removal was protection, that the room they were grieving was too small for what they were called to carry. You were removed from the small rooms. That is not loss. That is preparation. Here is the revelation that is going to change the way you see everything that has happened to you. Your weakness was not a problem to be fixed. It was a strategy being executed. Think about the most significant moments of your life. The ones where you felt most exposed, most inadequate, most out of your depth. Think about the moments where you looked at what was being asked of you and genuinely believed you were not enough. The moments where every reasonable voice inside of you said, "This is too much. I am not equipped for this. I am going to fail." Now think about what happened next. Not always immediately. Sometimes the gap between the impossible demand and the provision of the capacity to meet it was weeks or months or seasons that felt like years. But something kept happening, didn't it? You kept moving forward anyway. And what you discovered on the other side of those moments was not that you had somehow found hidden reserves of strength you didn't know you had. What you discovered was something far more significant, that in your most inadequate moments, something outside of yourself was working inside of you. That is the secret of chosen suffering. That is the thing that the world cannot explain and that only makes sense from a spiritual vantage point. Because if you were strong enough to do it alone, you would do it alone. And if you did it alone, you would take credit for it alone. And if you took credit for it alone, you would never have discovered the thing that was actually carrying you. The weakness was not the enemy of your purpose. The weakness was the invitation for something divine to enter your situation and do what only heaven can do. This is what others could not understand. When you tried to explain why you were still hopeful in the middle of disaster, why you still believed after the third and fourth and fifth disappointment, why you couldn't just let go and move on like everyone else suggested, they thought you were being irrational. They thought you were in denial. But you were operating on a frequency they didn't have access to. You were responding to something they couldn't hear. And the reason you couldn't explain it in a way that satisfied them is because some things are not meant to be explained to everyone. Some things are meant to be experienced by the ones who were chosen to carry them. And you were carrying something. You still are. Let me walk you into the middle of your story. Because this is the part that most people miss when they're in it, the significance of the middle. The beginning of a chosen one's journey gets attention. The end gets celebration. But the middle is where the real work happens, and the middle is invisible. The middle is the years of preparation that nobody posts about. The middle is the inner growth that doesn't look like anything from the outside. The middle is the prayer room at 3 a.m. The middle is the journal full of questions that haven't been answered yet. The middle is the Sunday when you sat in service and couldn't feel anything and had to decide whether you were going to stay anyway. The middle is the conversation you had with yourself in the car where you asked, honestly, whether any of this is real. You are somewhere in the middle right now. I know this because the people who have already reached the other side don't carry the weight in their chest that you are carrying. They look back on the middle and they understand it. but you are still inside of it, and from inside the middle it looks like a dead end. It is not a dead end. It is a corridor. And here is what I need you to understand about corridors. You do not sleep in a corridor. You do not set up your life in a corridor. A corridor is not a destination. It is a transitional space between where you were and where you are going. The fact that you are still in the middle does not mean you are stuck. It means you are still in motion. Corridors, by nature, lead somewhere. And the length of the corridor is not random. It is proportional to the distance between who you were when you entered it and who you need to be when you arrive. You needed a longer corridor than most people, not because heaven was punishing you, but because the destination is further than most people's destinations. Because what is waiting on the other side of your preparation requires the kind of person that this amount of formation produces. And the formation had to be thorough because the mission is significant, because the calling is not small, because you were not designed for an ordinary outcome. Everything suddenly makes sense, doesn't it? The delay was not a denial. The silence was not abandonment. The closed doors were not permanent. They were corridor walls, and you are still walking. And the end of the corridor is closer than you can see from where you are standing right now. There is something I need to say about your isolation. Because this is the thing that has perhaps confused you more than anything else. Why have you always felt slightly outside of things? Why, even in rooms full of people, have you often felt fundamentally alone? Why have your deepest thoughts remained largely unexpressed because you instinctively knew that most people around you did not have the framework to receive them? Why have you watched others bond easily over things that felt shallow to you, while the things that felt most alive inside of you had almost no one to share them with? This was not a character flaw. This was not social anxiety or emotional damage or any of the things the world might diagnose it as. This was spiritual protection and strategic separation happening simultaneously, because you were being kept separate for a reason. Because the voices that surround you during formation are the voices that shape what you become. And if you had fully merged into the crowd, if you had let the collective low-frequency thinking of ordinary life fully absorb you, the thing that was unique inside of you would have been diluted. The frequency you were designed to operate on would have been drowned out by the noise of a life spent conforming. The isolation kept you sensitive. It kept you tuned to something higher than the conversations that surrounded you. It kept you reaching towards something that your environment wasn't offering you, which meant you were always reaching. And people who always reach, people who are always leaning towards something beyond what is immediately visible, are people who are being trained to stretch. And the stretching, painful as it was, created capacity. Spiritual capacity, emotional capacity. The capacity to carry the weight of a life that is larger than average, to hold more joy and more responsibility, and more influence than the person who never learned to reach. Your isolation was the crucible, and the crucible was not a mistake. Most people will never experience what it feels like to be refined by that kind of purposeful aloneness. Most people will never develop the inner life that is formed in that silence. You did. And what was built inside of you during those quiet, invisible, lonely seasons is the very thing that is about to become visible, because the season of hiddenness is ending, and what was hidden is about to be revealed. Now let's talk about the victory. Because this is where everything changes. Unexpected victory does not look the way you imagined it would look. And I want to prepare you for that, because if you are waiting for something that looks exactly like what you pictured, you might walk right past the beginning of your breakthrough without recognizing it. The enemy expected that your pain would produce bitterness. The enemy's strategy was not just to hurt you, it was to use the hurt to corrupt your character. Because a chosen one who becomes bitter is a chosen one who is neutralized. A person carrying destiny who allows unforgiveness to calcify in their spirit is a person whose gifting still exists but whose capacity to use it becomes progressively limited. The bitterness was the intended end game. The suffering was just the mechanism. But something happened that the enemy did not account for. In the middle of your breaking, instead of becoming bitter, you became deeper. Instead of closing down, you opened up in places you didn't know could open. Instead of becoming harder, you became more perceptive, more compassionate, more acutely aware of the invisible things happening beneath the surface of visible reality. The wound, instead of poisoning you, educated you. The darkness, instead of extinguishing your light, revealed where your light actually came from. That is the unexpected victory. That is the reversal that happens when a chosen one refuses to be destroyed by their process. Everything the enemy intended to use against you became a qualification. Every scar became a story. Every deficit became a depth that ordinary success stories simply do not have. And now, you are moving into a season where those depths are about to become the very thing that sets you apart. Not in a showy way, not in a way that performs on the surface, but in the quiet, undeniable way that real authority carries itself. When you speak from what you've survived, something happens in the atmosphere around you that cannot be manufactured. When you encourage someone from a pain that was real, the encouragement lands at a level that rehearsed motivation cannot reach. When you live in the freedom that comes from having been broken and rebuilt, the peace on your life becomes a language that other people can feel before you say a single word. This is the weapon that was forged inside of your weakness, and you are about to discover what it does. You felt it before anyone told you. You knew somehow that what was happening to you was not the end of something. You knew that the losses were not the conclusion. You knew, even on the days when you couldn't access the knowing, that something larger was in motion. Let me explain why you knew that. Because the calling on your life was imprinted before the suffering began, before the disappointments, before the betrayals, before the seasons of confusion and delay. There was a design, a specific, intentional, heaven-authored design that was present before you were aware of it. And the suffering that came into your life was not capable of erasing what had been written before it arrived. It could obscure it temporarily. It could make it difficult to read. It could cause seasons where you doubted its existence entirely. But it could not erase it, because you cannot undo a calling from the outside. The only way a calling is lost is from the inside, and you never surrendered yours, even when you wanted to, even when you were exhausted enough that letting go seemed like mercy. Even when you were angry enough at the process that walking away felt justified. Even then, you didn't. And the reason you didn't isn't simply your own strength of will. The reason you didn't is because what was written over your life had its own gravitational pull. Your purpose was holding you in orbit even when you were trying to drift out of it. That persistent pull, that recurring return to something you couldn't abandon, was not stubbornness. It was the shape of your design making itself known. It was destiny being faithful even when you were faithless. It was heaven refusing to let you become less than what you were made to be, even in the seasons when you were actively trying to settle for less. You are not someone who settles. No matter how many times you've tried, you cannot make yourself content with small when something in you is calibrated for significance. That calibration is not arrogance, it is accuracy. And the accuracy of it is about to be validated in ways that will make you understand every single thing that happened to get you here. There is one more thing I need to say before we reach the other side of this message, and it is perhaps the most important thing I will say. The victory that is coming into your life is not going to be fully understood by everyone around you, and you need to be prepared for that. Because when you have been through a journey as specific as yours, when the formation has been as deep and as long and as private as yours has been, the emergence is going to look jarring to people who were not watching the preparation. They are going to see you in a new season and not fully understand how you got there. And some of them are going to be confused by it. Some are going to be suspicious. Some are going to search for an explanation that keeps the outcome within the bounds of what they already believe is possible for you. Because the alternative, the true explanation, requires them to expand their understanding of what was happening in you during the years when nothing appeared to be happening. Do not need them to understand. This is important. One of the final tests of the chosen one is the ability to walk into the victory without requiring the validation of the same people whose rejection was once a wound. Because if you still need the people who counted you out to finally count you in before you can move forward, you are still giving them authority over your narrative. And they were never meant to hold that authority. They never had access to the story. They couldn't see the formation. They weren't in the room when the preparation was happening. Their opinion of the outcome is not qualified because they did not witness the process. You witnessed the process. Heaven witnessed the process. And the two of you together are sufficient testimony to what was happening, even if no one else ever fully grasps it. The unexpected victory is unexpected to the enemy. It is unexpected to the people who underestimated you, but it is not unexpected to the one who authored it. It was always the plan. The delays were not deviations. The suffering was not an accident. The breaking was not a malfunction. Every single thing that happened to you was being woven with precise intention into an outcome that the architects of your opposition could not see coming, and they still don't see it coming. Let me tell you where you are right now, because I want you to hear this clearly. You are standing at the edge of something you cannot yet see clearly, but you can feel. There is a shift happening in the atmosphere around your life. Things that were locked are beginning to move. People who are meant for your next season are being positioned. Opportunities that were held in reserve, that were waiting for the version of you that has now been formed, are beginning to be released. The door that seemed permanently closed is not permanently closed. The provision that seemed perpetually delayed is not perpetually delayed. The recognition that felt like it would never come is not going to withhold itself indefinitely. Your season is changing right now. Not in a year, not when everything finally comes together perfectly. The shift has already begun in the unseen, and what begins in the unseen always, eventually, becomes visible. You are closer than you realize. You are, in fact, so close that the enemy's opposition has intensified. And if you are experiencing a new level of resistance right now, if the last few weeks or months have felt particularly heavy, I want you to understand something. The enemy does not spend significant energy attacking a life that is moving in the wrong direction. Intensified resistance is not a sign that you are losing. It is a sign that you are so close to something significant that the opposition has become desperate. You don't deploy maximum effort against something that isn't a threat. You are a threat to every limitation that was placed on your life, to every ceiling that was constructed over your potential, to every narrative that was written about you by people who didn't have the full story. And the fact that you are still standing, still believing, still carrying this calling even after everything it cost you to get here, that is not small. That is the definition of chosen. Your preparation was not wasted. Every prayer that felt unanswered was collected. Every tear that felt unwitnessed was seen. Every moment of faithfulness in the dark, every time you chose to keep going when stopping felt entirely reasonable, was recorded. Nothing was lost. Nothing was wasted. The investment of your suffering has been gathering interest in a spiritual account that is about to make a withdrawal you did not see coming. Your uniqueness was intentional. The things about you that have never fully fit anywhere, the way you think, the way you feel, the depth you carry, the questions you ask that no one else seems to be asking, those were not design flaws. They were design features. You were not made to fit into structures that already exist. You were made to build something that doesn't exist yet. You were made to occupy a space that is currently empty because it was shaped specifically for you. And the reason you've never fit anywhere else is because the place you were designed for has not yet been revealed. It is being revealed now. Your story is still unfolding. I know that feels almost too simple to be meaningful. I know you've heard the word process so many times that it has started to feel like a euphemism for delay. But I need you to hear it differently this time. Your story is still unfolding not because it is taking too long, but because what is being written requires more than a single act. It requires movement. It requires tension and release and reversal. It requires exactly the kind of suffering and perseverance and unexpected breakthrough that you are currently living through. This is not a simple story. It never was. And simple stories produce simple outcomes. Your story is producing something else entirely. The enemy's biggest mistake was underestimating you. And that mistake is about to become the most catastrophic miscalculation of the enemy's strategy against your life. Because everything that was weaponized against you, every tool of your opposition, every instrument of your suffering, every hand raised against your progress, has been, through a divine alchemy that defies rational explanation, converted into the raw material of your victory. Your weakness became your weapon, and the weapon is ready.
You sensed this before anyone told you. You know, in the place where knowing happened, beneath the reach of logic and explanation and the opinion of others, that you were not finished, that the story was not over, that the silence was not permanent, that the delay was not the final answer. You know it the way you know the things that are most true, not because someone provided it to you, but because something in you recognized it as accurate the moment it entered your consciousness. Trust that knowing now, more than ever, because you are standing at the threshold of the unexpected victory, the one that that doesn't look the way you imagine because it is better than what you imagine. The one that carries the fingerprint of heaven on it rather than the fingerprint of human planning because it was never fully in the human hands to beings with. The one that will make the people who doubted you fall silent not because you have proven them wrong, but because the advice of what was being prepared in the unseen will be so undeniable. The argument becomes impossible. This is your moment, not tomorrow, not when the conditions are perfect. Now, in this very season, the victory is already unfolding. It began before you recognize it. It has been in the motion even when your circumstances said nothing was moving, and it is arriving with a force that is proportional to everything it took to get you here. You are not who they said you were. You are not what the hardest season made you feel like. You are not the sum of your losses or the product of your wounds or the version of yourself that excited before the formation. You are the person who walked through every single thing that would have ended someone less prepared and come out on the other side, still carrying the original assignment, still intact at the level that matters, still moving towards the things that was written over your life before any of this began. The enemy looked at you and saw someone beatable. Heaven looked at you and saw something else entirely. Heaven was right. Comment chosen if this message found you exactly when you needed it. Share this with another chosen one who needs to hear that their unexpected victory is already on its way.